being with Appreciate you all being with us this morning and in our next edition of our HRTC meeting. I hope you're all finding yourselves well this Friday morning and getting ready for your weekend. This part of the agenda, we move into allowing members of the public who are here with us to come off mute, raise their hand, and offer some comments or to the group or any questions that folks that are not on the HRTC that are members of the public can do that now. So let me welcome those of you who from the public to make some comments in the chat or ask a question or come off mute and offer those for the rest of us. Could also be if there's any announcements that you want to share regarding your organization or things going on in the community that you want to share with the group. This is a good time to do that. So give it a few moments and welcome those of you who want to come off to do that.
Hey, Ish.
Yeah.
Good morning. Hey, I just wanted to mention the fact that OCBC had its annual dinner last Thursday night at the Disneyland Hotel. We had well over 700 people there in attendance, and many of our partners here on this project were there in support. So thank you to all of you who were able to participate, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to celebrate with more of you in future years to come. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate you sharing that. Would anyone else like to share? Si gustan compartir algo con el resto del grupo, ustedes que son miembros de la comunidad, no miembros de la mesa de gobernancia, pero están aquí con nosotros hoy como miembros de la comunidad que gustan compartir algo, un evento que está ocurriendo en su comunidad o quieran compartir con el grupo, los invitamos a que compartan esta mañana. Okay, not seeing any on the screen here. Jesse, anything on your end?
Nope, no one on the non-panelist side raising their hand.
Okay, and
so I think we can move on. Yeah,
we will move on and continue to introduce yourself and share. Remind folks who you're associated with regarding your organization and what part of the county you're joining us from. So continue that with the chat. Let's move on to comments and questions from members of the HRTC. Those of you who are part of the governance and voting body. Feel free to come off mute, ask questions, offer some comments, give some updates on work that your organization may be doing. Upcoming events that are occurring in the community. Overall feelings with the process so far. Those things are welcome. So let's open the floor for those of you on the HRTC to offer some comments or come off mute and ask a question or two. Si gustan compartir un comentario, una pregunta, los invitamos a que levanten la mano virtual o prendan el micrófono y compartan información o hacer una pregunta que tal vez tengan y quieran compartir con el resto del grupo. Let's go to Linda first. Welcome, Linda. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Just wanted to tell you that we had our Octane OC Partner Summit and this week, and we recognized the connectivity for all the work that we're doing to increase jobs, high-paying jobs, to build businesses, to have impact in the community, the live-work experience. It was really, really a splendid overview, and Jeff was part of that, so I wanted to thank him for being there. But I also want to mention that we are launching OC Innovation Week with our primary partners, OCBC, Octane OC, and UCI Beal Applied Innovation. That will be April 29 to May 3. And it's a week full of events showcasing all the innovation that's occurring in Orange County. And so we encourage the organizations that are part of the HRTC to connect with me, and I'll make certain that any opportunities or anything that you would like to showcase that's innovative and exciting, and I know that there's lots of them, that you would weigh in and perhaps become part of the event activities. And Jeff, would you like to add to that too, seeing as you're in the lead?
No, I think you covered it very well. The only thing you didn't mention, Linda, was the amazing job you did in leading the panel discussion at our event. earlier this week. Thank you for that. But Innovation Week is something new, and as Linda mentioned, we have the 3 organizations that have partnered up. This is designed similar to, you may have heard of South by Southwest in Austin or Tech Week that happens in Denver. It's a similar thing, and the intention is to showcase Orange County, the innovation that's happening here, and the great resources that we have to help ideas turn into action to provide further employment and growth opportunities in our local economy. So we're very excited to partner with Octane and UCI in bringing this event to Orange County, and look forward to having many of you engaged with us as we continue to move forward on that effort.
Great. Thank you, Linda and Jeff, both, and wonderful new asset that you are all helping foster in the Orange County community that I think many would agree aligns with elements of what we're doing here with the California Jobs First effort. So kudos to those of you involved with that effort as well, and look forward to more information being circulated around that. Anyone else would like to share any upcoming events or comments or questions regarding our work here with the effort? ¿Alguien gusta compartir novedades, eventos que se aproximan en el condado, en su comunidad, que gusten invitar o dar un poco de información a los compañeros y compañeras aquí? Okay, not seeing any on my end. Give it one last call. Otherwise, we'll pass the floor on to Jesse to give us an update on a set of events that took place in convening up in Sacramento this week, where Jesse and I and Tony Simons and Jeff and Gary and Katie were also involved, Katie Boyd, and but we'll start with Jesse. We'll certainly turn the mic to the rest of us who were there in a little bit, but Jesse, why don't you give us an overview of what was discussed at this convening in Sacramento, where all 13 of the regions that are doing this work around California came together to provide some updates, get some further direction from the state, and learn a little bit about some promising practices that are going on around California. Jesse?
Yeah, thank you, Ish. I'm gonna really really give a summary, and I would actually welcome the others who were in attendance to your thoughts, particularly on the workshops. I just think for the sake of time, I'm sure people are hankering to kind of look at the strategy results and discuss that. So I think some of the things that were discussed at the state convening between regional conveners and some with collaborative members across the state. So it was us, us with our counterparts. I think some of those themes will probably be brought up in future meetings, but I want to make sure there's just ample time for the very last portion of our agenda. So I think some big things to just know, and maybe you've already seen some of it, right? Like the state is, looking to retire SURF, Community Economic Resilience Fund. They're looking to retire phrases like High Road Transition Collaborative, High Road Jobs, and the like. So, this is very much now California Jobs First. Next week, they're going to do more of more outreach on how exactly they want branding communication done from a regional perspective. But California Jobs First with a byline of building a community-led, climate-forward economy. So that is kind of what we're going to be talking about more and more of. Just so again, this is from the state. This is how they want it branded. This was not a decision by the region. But ultimately, the goal of California Jobs First is to have a broader effort to align state agencies to truly address the needs of each region, right? We are a very diverse state. So how can the state be better at giving us the resources to do what we deem to be most important? I think that is a broader thing than just SURF, or the thing that we were working on, right? And so just so you know now, SURF is really more what's called the Regional Investment Initiative. California Jobs First will be a broader thing, although this is really the first and only thing as of now. But the state, again, will try to reorient themselves better. And that's really more of the California Jobs First umbrella. I think a question, what do we call ourselves? Are we the California Jobs First Orange County Collaborative? Are we the California Jobs First Collaborative Orange County? Things I need to talk to the state about. But I know it's going to take some time. I've been aware, you know, back in, I think, October, right-ish, when they kind of announced it, that this was going to be the transition. And even I
Right.
call it surf all the time. So trust me, like it's going to take months for you to get surf and community economic justice fund out of your head. And that's totally normal. But just know that we're going to start using this language more. That's what they kind of informed us of. And again, as we get more materials, it might help with kind of the ultimate rebrand. But I think the intent here is good because like the state intends on making our reports fundable and actionable. So we are working on we did our regional plan part 1. We're moving towards regional plan part 2. And it's not, you know, they've said it multiple times. It's not like this report will just sit on the proverbial shelf, but they're going to look to each region and the things that we prioritize to try to organize the resources and the grants that they deploy to actually meet these needs. And so as you kind of see here, right, regional plans inform the state is going to go through and develop its own operational plan, which then informs the investments in each region. I think another way of saying it is, you know, I think that's the best way to say it. So this regional plan is important. The states will look at the regional plans to determine what their operational plan will be. And then with the right operational plans, we should see more investments in our regions and the investments we want to see in our region. So I think it's almost like a flywheel or a circle, and that's how they impact one another. But one thing that's also really important, which I think we were going to do anyways, but it's clear, it's nice that the state was very clear, is that, you know, we will have to submit a few projects, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But ultimately, they do want to see a portfolio of projects. Some will be more direct to the regional investment initiative, and we have to always be focused on that. But it could be broader than that. And the state is going to again try to realign the funding it does have in order to meet, in order to help get funding for these portfolio of projects. So again, hypothetically, you know, we have to pick 3 projects. We should still have a list of 10, 15, or 20 that we were going to be committed to. And I've already kind of said this, to try to receive funding because they were also very good projects. We could only pick a narrow amount in order to receive that regional investment initiative funding. So that just was very clear. So as we think about this, you know, tough decisions are going to have to be made, but ultimately we still want a portfolio of projects that we're going to go to the federal government for funding. We'll go to different state agencies for funding. We'll see what philanthropy can support. So that's something that was discussed overall. I think with that, before I go into the criteria for the catalyst and implementation projects, there were a few workshops, but I think we'll include that in a future conversation. I would like Ish and some of the people who do attend, just their overall impressions or things that they thought were important takeaways that maybe this whole group should be aware of.
Yeah, let me start with, because I incorrectly called her Katie and not Kathy, Kathy Boyd, if she's on. I certainly want to welcome her to kick us off with her impressions and feedback on the session. Let me double check to see if she's.
Hi. Can you hear me?
There you are.
Yes.
Kathy, go
Sorry,
ahead.
guys. I'm traveling from Monterey, so I'll just be very short. I mean, I was able to spend the first day with the team up there in Sacramento, and I think I just want to echo the branding statements that was made by Jesse. They're very clear, and I think that they want to be inclusive of everything, but they're trying to make this a real initiative about bringing our region together around those priority sectors and the work that we feel is needed. And so they're leaving us with a lot of autonomy. I think other than that, we did some really good design work and thinking around some next steps. And so I'm eager to get together back with the big committee at future meetings. And once we have all this data in and analyzed, it's going to be cool to see what projects we decide on. But other than that, because I am traveling, I won't go much further. Ish, I'll let you kind of take it from there.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just to give you some examples of what other regions are, how they're branding themselves to get your juices, creative juices flowing. There's places in the state, they're calling themselves, for example, Redwood Rise. There is Together We Prosper in the Sacramento area, Uplift Central Coast, I think Northern San Joaquin, Thrive. Those are just some branding examples of what other regions are calling themselves under this this initiative that you all are also participating in. So just some examples. But let me turn to Gary. Gary, you were there for both days. Let me turn to you for some feedback and some impressions of what you gathered from the convening.
Sure, I'll be very brief. I think as has been said, the branding is a huge issue. The state is all on board on jobs first, and I think we're going to see more and more of that. And I think Jesse's right. It's going to take a while to get HRTC out of our head and surf. I think the other thing that I walked away with is how committed the state is to the success of this project. The number of state people who were there, who are involved in this, I think that was impressive. And I would say the third thing that I was kind of amazed at is that there's 13 regions, and I would suggest that all 13 are kind of structured differently. To give you an example, is Kern County and Orange County are lucky enough to be one region. Our county boundaries coincide with one region. So you would think they would be similar. They're not. Orange County, we have one convener, that's OCBC, and we have, I believe the number is 71 members on the collaborative. On the other hand, Kern County has 5 conveners that have to vote and agree on how to go forward. And their collaborative is basically only 17 members. And so that's just, they're all different. And yet we're all on the same road to doing the same thing and in competing and being successful in this endeavor. But I thought it was a very beneficial 2 days.
Great, thank you, Gary. Thank you. Tony, let me turn to you. Tony Simons was there with us as well. And let me offer you the floor to share some comments and feedback.
Yeah, when I put in the chat, I was very clear that the state was happy with our progress, and not that that's the only reason that we're here, but when your grant holder meets with you and and it's a very positive experience, that's always good. Especially the other part that I thought was really excellent was that in the areas where we've used our creativity, we have been within bounds, but not necessarily following what other areas are doing. And everybody seems very cool with that. The big piece, and this ties into our other topics today, and it's on this list under the operational plan. So we're going to do a strategy, and the strategy, as Jesse said, is going to have 2 to 3, whatever the decision of the priority number of projects. But the strategy itself is a comprehensive healthcare, environment, housing, economic development in its biggest sense. So the strategy is everything that is important and vital and drives the quality of life and economy of Orange County. And so the strategies can address those things. And so it was really clear that there's a separation between projects and overall strategies. The strategies can drive external funding, federal funding, other state funding, philanthropy, and that the state is creating this thing called an operational plan. And the operational plan is taking all 13 regional strategies, comprehensive strategies, and building that upward so that they can engage each region as the region has determined they wish to be engaged. And so again, not just the 3 projects that we're talking about for the implementation phase money, but the other strategies in the other comprehensive economic development categories. I thought they explained it extremely well, and I really appreciated that they hit on that multiple times, whether we're doing enviro, we're doing healthcare, childcare, all those things. So I was very impressed.
Great, thank you, Tony. And last but certainly not least, and right on cue, is our representative from GoBiz with her hand up. Christy, we want to turn to you as well to offer your feedback and give us your reactions.
Good morning, everyone. It was really lovely to have a few of us go to the winter convening to really see what all the other regions are doing. So I really want to echo what Jesse and Tony have said, that these regional plans are going to be really important. So as we move forward in this process, I want you all to really think, what is Orange County's story? The state is really looking for a regions up approach. So just continue to think, what do we need as a community? So then that can then lead into our regional plans being super great. As Tony said, the state is really happy with Orange County. I love being from this area, so that is always a win. And then eventually these will go into our larger operational plans that hopefully will really be able to support regions of approach, a community approach to economic development.
Great. Thank you, Christy. And those of you who may not know, Christy is the pride and joy of Fountain Valley there in Orange County. So be aware of that. And also, if you haven't done so already, connect with Christy. Christy wants to talk to all of you. Again, she's our key to the state. She's our representative with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And she's been starting to make her rounds with several of you. And so if you haven't connected, Christy wants to talk to you. And that's in, whatever language of choice you want, we'll provide facilitation services if needed. I certainly will make myself available in Spanish if those of you that speak Spanish want to talk to Christy. Si gustan, les estamos pidiendo que si no lo han hecho, que se conecten y hagan una reunión con Christy. Es nuestra representante para esta iniciativa con el Estado. Y para ustedes que tal vez prefieran hablar con ella en español, yo me ofrezco como traductor para ayudarles a tener esa conversación con Christy, para que puedan darles su punto de vista de esta iniciativa y lo que esperan ver de este trabajo a largo plazo. Entonces, si no se han conectado con Christy, los invitamos que lo hagan lo más pronto posible. Thank you, Christy. And then let me just wrap up by offering my quick 2 cents from me. For what it's worth, during our one-on-one meeting, each region had a one-on-one check-in with the state, and as Tony mentioned, went really well. They had a lot of things to commend Orange County for, among that being, really ahead of the curve on different fronts, from, the number of partners involved, the inclusivity of it. One thing that I offered to the conversation was just telling the people from the state how committed each and every one of you have been since the start, that you continue to show up, and you show up and contribute really meaningfully, and that the level of attrition here has been very, very low, if almost non-existent. And it's really, I think, a reflection on the appetite that you all have to do work differently moving forward across sectors, breaking down silos, and making sure that, those of you from different interest groups are talking to one another, from different industry sectors are involved. And I also just, offered that, this group has done a really good job of being disciplined and on schedule with its timeline. And that's allowed actually a lot of flexibility and inclusivity in the process, that we've been able to take some pivots, put some pause on deadlines, and extend deadlines to offer more opportunity for all of you to contribute and provide input to the different steps that we've taken over the last, almost year now. And, one example is, the extra time we offered, the pivot that we made a couple weeks ago with giving folks more time to review the strategies whose results we're going to hear about today. And so I just want to commend and salute all of you for being, so dedicated to this effort and helping us stay on track, and being open to pivoting where pivots are needed. And that's allowed us to be more inclusive in the process. So congrats and kudos to all of you. But with that, let me turn to Jesse to jump into the next piece of it, which is the criteria that, is coming up with the catalyst and other parts of the project in the coming months. So Jesse, turn back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ish. So again, we did get this from the state. This is also, it's in draft form. We will do a public comment period. I think this is part of it, is to socialize it with you. Take any questions or comments you have. If Christy can answer them. If not, we'll definitely take everything down and send it over to her and her team to try to get answered. But they will do, probably a statewide webinar. So again, but they wanted to get this moving here, try to provide some clarity. Obviously, they've gotten a lot of response from regions about wanting more clarity. So this is the state, I think, trying to provide it, but also acknowledge that the state is in an interesting position, because they recognize that really the bulk of the funding that could really help our region is going to come from the federal government. And so there's always a delicate dance between providing guidance in order for us to have clarity and try to make better decisions, versus not to contradict or to undermine what the federal government might be doing. So again, they are trying to move forward with this. So just be aware that there's always going to be, and I think everyone here has been flexible between how much guidance the state will provide without being too hands-on and not allowing the regions to make decisions, but also making sure that the regions are still going to be eligible for federal government funding, which is going to be the bulk of the money. I think we are working towards that regional investment initiative dollars that, so 275 million or so. But we know that, the bulk of what they talk is like $180 billion of investment is primarily going to come from the federal government, and making sure that we're in a position to get our fair share. But these are both for catalyst and implementation outcomes. Again, this is draft form. You have a PDF in the file that I sent you. This is somewhat of a breakdown of that. Please refer to that, in your off time. And again, if you have questions or comments, please let me know. But primarily, the state is focused on two big things: economic competitiveness and economic resilience. And you'll kind of see how they defined it there. So as we think about the things that we're working on, making from an economic standpoint, we have to kind of move in with these two aspects in mind. I think the biggest thing is looking at the activities that they did mention as we start thinking about, as we continue to refine the strategies that we're going to do later today in the project. But this is not an exclusive list, but they wanted to elevate these lists, right? So expanding access to capital, expanding innovation entrepreneurship, having a strong business attraction, expansion, or retention strategy and execution plan, and building a skilled workforce. I think those are all things we've already been talking about, which is wonderful. Again, this is not a limited list, but these are the things that they wanted to elevate and highlight. Economic resilience, we've talked about that before, but something interesting is, understanding the conditions of your economic advantages, or, can you see the writing on the wall? So it's not just a pandemic, but I would say if you bring up in the case of Detroit, what could have Detroit seen and that greater area in order to combat, global competition in the car industry? And so they did not respond. They did not either see it or they did not respond well. And you saw the impacts in the kind of the Midwest because of that. So this is like the equivalent of, are there things that we could see, trends that we see that might be troubling for certain industries, and how can we make those more resilient? But again, I think it's always great to have activities. So are the activities building capacity of organizations serving disinvested communities, of which there are very many, or there are a lot on this collaborative, so they can compete for federal and state grants? Are we building wealth in disinvested communities, and are we diversifying our economy, right? So we have an incredibly diverse economy in Orange County, one of the most diverse in the country. But even then, are there other industries we can kind of bring in under our umbrella? So, not all our eggs in one basket, so to speak. So this is baseline criteria requirements for all projects must meet. There's some dense stuff in here, and so I have some hyperlinks, but I'm sure I know in a future meeting we'll probably unpack what some of these things mean. So you as a collaborative are better informed when you start thinking about projects, and we think about selecting and essentially grading projects. But there needs to be an equity lens. We've been talking about this from the very beginning. Again, this is all in draft form, but at least 40% of funds, again, to provide support for disinvested communities. They will not define direct, meaningful, and assured benefit for us, or at least not directly. There's not going to be a glossary of terms here. So some of it, I think they'll provide guidance, but some of it will be our own definition of what that means. So start thinking about that. Even that 40% number, I think the 40% number is in line with the federal guideline called Justice 40. And so people can kind of review that, but I'm sure we'll discuss it at a future meeting as well. But this is still in draft form. Hypothetically, the state could go higher with that percentage if there's feedback accordingly. But we will, again, as so applicants will need to identify and explain the benefits in their application. So us kind of self-defining what direct, meaningful, and assured means. The applicant or co-applicant to the projects we're going to submit needs to be in or serving a disinvested community. In a previous meeting, if you were there, you've probably heard Matt Phillips with OPR talk about this racial equity executive order and how there's a racial equity commission within his own department. But the projects need to be in alignment with that executive order. So you can kind of read that executive order. There needs to be an equity impact assessment, a displacement analysis. And so again, I'm sure the state will provide it, or I'm going to ask the state if they have templates that they'd like to use our models, or can we kind of define this ourselves and include community engagement strategy with feedback mechanisms. We've been trying to engage the community. We obviously did that big outreach and engagement effort to know what the needs of the community are in order for us to make sure that strategies are meeting those as well as projects. But the projects themselves kind of need that feedback mechanism. So this is a baseline. That means it must meet these criteria. This is a at least type of thing. So that's on the equity front. There is a climate component, and it needs to be in alignment with major state climate goals. So I have included the three things that they explicitly mentioned. More may come. Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. There needs to be obviously safe and reliable groundwater in a sub-regional way. So there's a lot of different, not quite water districts, but there are in a variety of regions these plans that we have to make sure that we are in alignment with or do not contradict. You know, there's an executive order about protecting and restoring the state's biodiversity, and then CARB scoping plan, and someone can correct me, but it's essentially kind of the state's plan to try to be carbon neutral by 2045. And so we have to make sure that we are, you know, through these projects, getting the state and getting the residents of the state into that direction as well. So there's the mandatory climate component, and there's this is next, the mandatory job quality and access component. Create family sustaining jobs with healthcare, retirement benefits, upward mobility, access to training, consistent scheduling, safe working conditions, and opportunities for collective worker input, and ensure equitable access to quality jobs for communities throughout the region. I don't think that is something unique to what we've kind of been working on and trying to work on, but we have to make sure that the applications are meeting that. And at the end of the day, right, we have to approve this. Someone cannot bypass us in order to get funding for this. So that's very critical, and why at the end of the day, we're all very involved. So this is baseline. So that means like every project at a minimum has to meet these requirements, but there are bonus points assigned if we can do if the projects can do other things, which is, you know, can we go above 40% of the benefits for disinvested communities? Can assets or programs owned or controlled by members of disinvested communities, can those be created through these projects? Is there a local hire or targeted hire provision? Is there inclusion of project labor agreement, community workforce agreement, or community benefits agreement? Is there training and support for people with employment barriers? And the state will define those. I didn't want to go kind of too long on this. You know, is it funding alternative models of ownership for land, business, or other assets? Worker cooperatives, we have one on the collaborative. We have several community, or at least one, if not several, community land trusts on the collaborative as well. And are we leveraging our regional assets, investments, and process of additional funding attached? So other funding sources layered together. So this investment fund isn't the only thing funding the project, right? There's you know, money in the pot, there's skin in the game from other entities in order to make this work. There is a prohibition though, is, you know, nothing related to kind of fossil fuel extraction or the growth of the fossil fuel industry here in Orange County or the state of California. But that is the criteria that's being given. I think it's just a more clear articulation of what the state wants, but they didn't deviate, I don't think, from the themes. And I don't think, at least from my perspective, things that we weren't going to look towards anyways as we thought about the quality of projects. So with that, are there kind of, I'll stop share. Are there questions or comments initially about what you just heard? Again, I think we're going to unpack some of the many things that they listed as guidance, you know, referring to executive orders, referring to other plans, but any kind of questions or comments about where the state is directing us as we start thinking about catalyst activities and implementation projects. And again, for the people who were present during that presentation on the collaborative, I'm more than welcome to chime in to give your impressions of that presentation. I know that's a lot to unpack. Again, I think we're happy to have, again, for people who are interested, if we want to kind of dig in deeper, so this doesn't eat up the entire collaborative for multiple meetings, happy to try to kind of, if people want to go through every line here and discuss, you know, contact me and we can kind of build that out. And then we can kind of provide our comments to the state based on that. So again, we'll take the questions now from initial thoughts or perspectives, but if there are those who want to dig deeper into these project criteria, provide feedback to the state, because this is just a draft, they will go out to public comment and they can make modifications. I'm happy to do that as well. I think, Luis, I saw your hand pop up for a little bit.
Thank you, Jesse. Luis, Luis, did you want to come off mute? Bienvenido.
I'm still kind of organizing my thoughts a little
Sure.
bit, but yeah.
No.
Yeah, Luis, again, I heard this Wednesday. I still am too, so don't worry. I can imagine 2 minutes. I've got 48 hours to sit with this.
Yeah, I'd like to hear others' thoughts, and then yeah, I think I do have some comments.
Sure.
We'll give it a few minutes and then come back to you. How about others? Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this might be a good opportunity to do a work group, task force, whatever people feel comfortable with the term, so that those that want to can really go through it line by line. It may or may not end up wanting to do comments. I think comments would be good, but the group should decide that. And then from kind of a foundation, you could then move forward and say, if this is the baseline, what does that mean for the OC? And then what might we add? And there's so much here that I just believe it's going to take us more time, and that may not be something everybody wants to participate in every moment. And so I suggest a work group.
That's a good recommendation, Tony. Certainly something we'll connect with you offline on how to potentially organize that. Great, thank you. Linda, let's go to you, and then we'll go to Kate.
Yes, thank you. The old joke about how much time do you have, because there are obviously so many questions. But I do have to ask a top line question. It appears to me, or I'm discerning, that the information that you're sharing today is equivalent. We should think of it as like check boxes. In other words, however we collaborate on the proposals, on the bids, and so forth, we have to check these boxes. These things must be integrated or incorporated in some way. Would that be an accurate understanding?
Yeah. So, yeah, mandatory. Check what you want to call it. It's mandatory. Correct.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Okay, let's turn to you.
I'm just, in one way, it feels like we did things a little out of order. So now we have this long list of check boxes and a baseline, but we've already voted on the kinds of projects we want, and maybe that's fine. And we'll figure out what the alignment is, or I guess maybe in the second part of our conversation, we'll figure out if there's any misalignment. Is there, I guess that's my question. Are we concerned that now that we have this new box to be within, is that going to jibe with all the work that we've already done?
A great question. It can be the victim of maybe being ahead of other regions. But so I think we're not going to do that, right? So we let's look. Okay, I think there's more that I'm going to be an intermediary go-between to get clarity from the state on some of the things we decide. I mean, the state provided some feedback like on the research, so then it's not as if they can't say, this isn't an optimal strategy, let's say, based on what we're trying to do. And then of course, that's our decision. We could still plant that stake in the ground because it is important, or we can try to modify. So I think that maybe in some ways, I mean, it's not ideal timing that it was 48 hours before this meeting, but also it's something now I think that we can all be thinking about as we go to the second part of the agenda. So thank you for flagging that. And I think just like anything, we're not obviously finalizing those strategies by the end of today. And so I think we'll have more time to digest some of this stuff and how it's going to end up when we talk about the final product a couple of weeks from now, or even a month or two from now. But thank you for bringing that to everyone's attention.
Thank you, Kate. Other hands, or anyone else that would like to come off mute? And Luis, if you're ready too, Luis, I'm happy to turn back to you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just again, like several of you are saying, it's a lot to digest. But I guess first of all, I have some some critical points that I want to share, not without first acknowledging all of the work that's gone into getting us to this point. And I think that that's important to recognize that a lot of folks have put in a lot of work. Real quickly, just on that branding piece, I felt like that was maybe it's not the most important, but definitely can play a role in how effective our initiative can be in the community. SURF was kind of a hard name to work with in the community. But at the same time, I don't love Jobs First. It feels very old school to me. In like not in a good way, kind of. But I like that Ish that you mentioned that other regions are kind of coming up with cooler names. I think that might be something worth discussing.
Mhm.
I guess my main feeling right now is that whatever we do next is going to be really important. And I feel like I do feel like we're at this juncture where it could be very easy to move forward, like with the checkbox mentality of, we have people of color on, in the space. We have this, but are we really centering the involvement of disinvested communities? Are we really, making sure that the dollars are reaching those neighborhoods and those communities that have not been in ownership positions historically? So I guess I just would invite us to continue to move in that direction and make sure. I like that the state did include a lot of things that we can build off of, like the obviously the importance of racial equity, that question of the feedback mechanisms, I feel like is also going to be super important. Like we've brought up a few times, that we've managed to do community outreach meetings. That's good, but are we taking it back again to community spaces to vet, if we're on the right track or not? And so a few of us had proposed, hosting an additional community forum, which I'm hoping we can follow up still to do. So those are some of my thoughts. And also the importance, it was mentioned, the importance of our regional plan document,
Mhm.
which is a monster of a document. So I kind of like Tony's suggestion about, a work group, or, if folks want to get together to really dive into that, or maybe splitting it up in a way. I know that there's some content in there like that, that we should look into further, especially if, like was suggested in the presentation, that document is going to be seen as kind of like an implementable document. But those are some of my thoughts, and thank you to everyone who has been putting in work, and let's see where we can go from here.
Gracias, Luis. Thank you for coming off mute and sharing that. Others? I think we have time maybe for one or two more comments before we dedicate the rest of the time today to do a anticipated review of the results of the poll and the strategies that you all participated in helping select. But other questions on this topic before we transition to the other part of the agenda? Comentarios o preguntas que tengan sobre el contenido que acaba de presentar Jesse, sobre las próximas etapas de esta iniciativa y los meses que vienen, el trabajo que viene en determinar no solamente las estrategias, pero los proyectos y esta capa adicional de lo que se le llama el Catalyst Fund para poder implementar proyectos con esos recursos que son distintos a los que estamos tratando de organizar con las estrategias, pero complementarios. ¿Preguntas o comentarios que tengan? O si no, vamos a avanzarnos a la próxima sección de la agenda. Okay, not seeing any hands or questions in the comment. I think we can probably transition to the next part of the agenda, and that takes us also to Jesse to walk us through an overview of what you all identified as priorities collectively with the strategies.
There's just a few things. There's one thing in between, but I'll transition both of them over. So I think, Luis, you bring up a point, and so this is there's some big things, and if you see, there's kind of originally I was thinking about a timeline given some of this information, but it's really hard for this region. One is the state will most likely allow us to complete this work by August 31st. I think I've already brought that up before, instead of at the end of June. So 2 more months to do the work. So we have to think about that. But one thing primarily that came up and it was just brought up in real time, and the highest levels of the state on this project were present, was the idea of not even having the region submit the 2 to 3 priority projects as part of the regional plan part 2. If that is the case, that really lessens the workload, because our impression was that we were going to commit a lot of time, maybe even months, to the selection of those projects. I need to go to the state. We need, to get final order, but that's something as we think about the timeline. And again, in the next couple of weeks, I'll try to make it more concrete so we can kind of see sequentially and get your input on things that could be missing. But that's huge. If the state decides to completely pull that out as a mandatory deliverable, that completely changes our timeline and the way this process may go down. Even though we still have to kind of ask ourselves, if the state is going to release this SFP in September, which is when the funding will be, are we going to wait for the final SFP and then go through the project solicitation process, which will then be delayed, and then submit? Or do we feel like we have enough to have pretty strong projects and then be able to submit the first thing in September? They also want us to have a portfolio of projects. I guess the question is, at what point? So this will kind of will disrupt what I think is a timeline for execution between now and the end of September. And then this is more specifically to what Luis brought up, and I'm not expecting anyone to have answers, is do we add more criteria so it's not just box checking, or do people feel that what the state has kind of already articulated is already a pretty high bar for some projects, and we don't want to exclude projects any further from submitting, but we actually want to see the proposal for us to decide on which ones are the strongest. There could be ones that just surprise us, that we'd have to almost see it first to know that it even existed, hypothetically or potentially. So these are things that I don't think there is an answer for. I need to go back to the state. I already have one luckily scheduled with them this time next week. But I just think for this whole group to think about is how do we kind of, one is you don't have an answer maybe to the first one, is if we're going to remove project selection, but think about, do we want to just have projects ready for as soon as funding is available to submit? And then again, if we do, then, and we want to, the third question, want to add more criteria, then we have to start understanding what those are. So if the question could be maybe to the third one, no, we feel like that's sufficient, then we don't have to tackle that. If the group, and we can try to poll in a future meeting, that we do want to add more criteria to it that are more specific to the needs of our region, then we have to include that into this process to some degree. So again, these are things to think about. They're really big question marks. And so that's kind of what you'll see here. Without kind of clarity or us making a decision as a region, it's going to be hard to give you a more specific timeline. But let me, sorry.
And really quick, while Jesse moved into the next piece, just to make sure we're all on the same page on acronyms. SFP is a solicitation for proposals. That's the mechanism that many government agencies use to invite folks to submit their proposals to be considered for funding. Sometimes they're also called RFPs, requests for proposals, but that's the formal process for contracting for competitive funding opportunities and or opportunities in general, whether they're competitive or not. But
yeah,
by SFP. But go ahead, Jesse.
And here's what I can do. And you'll see this in the folder, is here's still a list of things we still have to do regardless. The reason why it's not in a timeline is because, like I said, if the state severs project selection until after September, then the timeline doesn't have to be so dense. But if this is here, we still have to, as we're going to do today, review and finalize strategy framework, work with the state to see, what more detail they want, because I'm sure they're not just going to want a list of 21 strategies. They're going to want, the historical context, what assets does Orange County have to meet these, what else is needed, why this could be impactful. I'm sure some body to the in a text would be necessary. But we'll continue to review the guidelines. As I mentioned, we'll probably unpack some of those guidelines, maybe in the working group, but still inform this body to some degree. We did this whole stakeholder mapping exercise. How are we going to, facilitate what was developed there so the people could utilize it in project proposal, or just greater collaboration and cohesion? Tony brought up a budget advocacy letter, more, by the week. It seems like that's going to be needed more and more. So we'll probably address that at a future meeting in the next one. Process for considering non-serve projects. And then just generally, right, we are going to have to develop a scope of work for investor sector coordinators, review and select those. We're going to have to develop our own kind of SFP in alignment with the state on our implementation projects. What's going to be the process for that? So we still have a lot to do, don't get me wrong, and I just want you to show this list. And once I get clarity from the state and try to get your feedback in probably the next meeting, I can put this in well, what are we going to expect to do in April? What are we going to expect to do in May and all the way through the end of September? Then, of course, Catalyst is supposed to be woven in here at some point come May. So this is just a sense of the workload ahead. We, I'm still talking about September, so we still have many months to do this, but it's not as if we are almost done here. And so I just want to give you a sense of the workload ahead. And as I mentioned, I will put it, I will put it in a timeline once we kind of know and get a sense of how we want to tackle the projects part and those deadlines and timelines there. So I don't want to spend too much on this unless there are if there are questions right now. I'll take it. If not, again, I'd rather I would like to maximize the time.
Yeah.
Our
Yeah,
very
Jesse,
last
one quick question in the chat,
Sure.
maybe a request from Teresa Schickling. If you would consider sending out an email after the meeting to give more sense or overview of what direction the state's potentially going in. And maybe that comes later after you have a follow-up conversation with the state as well, and you have more direction, but just that was in the chat for you to respond to.
Thank you. Yeah, so with my call with them next week on Friday, I mean, you guys will be informed of some of those answers at the next meeting for us, which would be the following week. So in my kind of my review email, you'll kind of see that, or preparation email, I guess probably is a better term. You'll see that as well. So let me get into the last portion here. So sorry, it's loading. And then you all have this in the folder I sent. So as I mentioned in the email, I know I sent it, somewhat late last night. This is not a fully final number. Some people, mistakenly voted more than 3 in certain categories. So I'm looking for them to correct it because I did not want to obviously just dismiss all the answers of that category for that person. So just know that there could be some changes, but not so much as if, let's just scroll down, like of numbers 11 or number 10 here will somehow make it to the top 3. But if you see some that are on the bubble between 3 and 4, which in this case would be cells 2 to 4, that's where you could see a change hypothetically on some of these categories. So it's not final, but this is still a very close picture. I think it's only about 4 more people are left outstanding here, just to give you a sense. So we're almost there. But what I tried to do, because I think many people brought up, some things sound similar, some are broad, some are more specific. I tried to kind of color code on a thematic basis. And so the whole point of why they're broken up into tabs is still to give you a sense of who the top vote getters are. This is, again, get a sense of where you and your fellow collaborative members are as far as the things that they prioritize. Kate, kind of to your point, I'll dig in deeper. I still don't see anything that would necessarily contradict anything. I think it could probably be clear and more direct to maybe what that state's SFP is. But also, as I've mentioned, everyone, we have to balance between broadly what our needs are versus making sure that, of course, we're not leaving ourselves out of the funding for the regional investment. But also, again, as I kind of mentioned, recognizing that there's more funding elsewhere. And by putting it in the strategies, by putting those strategies into this document, we are going to continue to move forward on trying to receive funding on those fronts as well. But I just, again, I don't want to kind of click through every tab here, but I just wanted to show you. So if you go through every tab, it'll at least give you a sense of which the top vote getters are. I know I'm kind of skipping some. Let me have the closed caption. So again, just kind of looking at the top vote getters here. But again, what is probably most helpful is that I tried to put them kind of, because you can look back to see how they're color coded in these buckets. And then I know it can be hard to read, but then the lettering in red means it was, a top vote getter. It might be in the top 3, might be in the top 4, depending on the final outcomes. So the point of that is to say, as we've kind of also mentioned, it's not as if you can find one that was a low hanging vote getter and somehow modify it to be a top vote getter. You could try to make it included in this language if we like, but it's not as if we can completely rewrite these strategies. I think it would undermine the process we set out and how we got here. So what you'll see here is the ones in red are the ones that we will most likely work off of. But for example, if you think about workforce and education, that could have been broken down more. Even like as you can see here, there's things that were just apprenticeships are in its own category. Of course, apprenticeships goes towards the workforce and education. You can make the argument it could have been in this category, but this is when something language like apprenticeships was specifically drawn out. I kind of put it in its own category. But if you look, that there's about 6 that were top vote getters in the workforce and education category. Hypothetically, if the group wants to, you could try to see if there's ways to merge some of those winners together, and that would maybe open up more space for some that might have been 4th or 5th place that were kind of a completely different strategy, so to speak, to kind of make their way to the top 21 or so that we're going to have to get to. Again, I apologize. This was done late last night. I was in Sacramento Wednesday when the poll closed, so I spent all of Thursday trying to kind of assemble it together. So I know we have time to review that, but I wanted to just give you a sense of that's how this thing works. As I mentioned, there's no way we're not going to finalize these and certify them and send them to the state by the end of this call. But it's still, again, wanted to give you a sense of what the top vote getters were. And if we think about modifying language, consolidating certain things or refining language, that, you know, these are the broader categories where people could feel like there's some duplication or redundancy in order to do that.
Yeah. And just let me just add, and I'm going to offer it in Spanish because this was a question that surfaced in our prep meeting for today with our Spanish-speaking HRTC members. Lo que Jesse está comentando ahorita, y creo que lo platicamos el martes en la tarde, fue la opción que tiene aquí la colectiva de determinar si donde haya estrategias que fueron elegidas con la mayoría de votos, que si hay duplicación o repetición, se sienten, suenan similar, puede ser la opción del grupo de combinarlas y tratar de posiblemente abrir espacio en ese proceso de combinar. Se abre espacio para que surja otra estrategia que tal vez no se quedó entre las primeras 3, pero muy cercana en 4º lugar. Entonces quería invitar a ustedes que platicaron eso conmigo, Karen o María o Apolonio, si gustan ofrecer un comentario sobre el tema, que sé que fue una pregunta que tuvieron el martes.
So with that, I mean, please, discussions or thoughts, I'm happy just to toggle in between pages if it makes it easier to make your thoughts more clear. Again, I apologize for getting this to you late. But I think maybe this was the best way I thought to try to, as you think about what the next steps are, what the right language is going to be ultimately, that this might have been a good layout. Or if people hate this layout, I can try to think of or if people have a better idea of how they might want to approach this. I'm happy to do that as well.
Jesse, this is Linda. You know, unless somebody has a superseding request, if we could just go back to the headline strategies.
Yeah.
So strategies for the growth of target industries and so forth. Could you just hit the top 3 vote getters?
Oh, yes.
Because it's very small. It's a little hard to see.
All right.
We'll all read them, but if you could just give us food for thought here.
Sure,
Thank you.
actually. So the top 3 vote getters for this category: invest in the success of the local workforce by providing training opportunities that empower lower wage employees to acquire higher paying jobs in priority industries. And the things in parentheses, there was some feedback by, you know, in the previous call about including language. So those in parentheses were not in the original, say, strategy that was voted on by the stakeholder. But so just so you know, again, even that needs to be finalized even further. And this is especially in environmental and climate related jobs. Number 2 is funding for pre-training or soft skill training and or internships. This is important infrastructure for workforce development and will teach transferable skills that will benefit all workers, especially with those limited or no work experience. And then funding and technical assistance for small business community and entrepreneurs. with the added language, with it adds in language, focused outreach, or other guidelines to ensure resources benefit small business owned by historically disinvested community members, namely BIPOC-owned small businesses. So that was from the growth of targeted industries. Those are the 3 vote getters. And it just doesn't look like the gap between 3 and 4 that it would be overcome even by the votes still outstanding. So if we move into increasing economic diversification, support efforts by local educational institutions, especially those serving disadvantaged communities, to connect with local employers and build talent pipelines, affordable housing for workers and addressing gentrification and rising prices. And as you can see, there's a tie for 3rd place, develop mid-level technical jobs that do not require 4-year degree in emerging industries, funding to make the childcare and transportation resources more robust and readily available. You want to improve mobility while also reducing admissions. And I will say the 6th one, just because it is one-off, but it's not in the technically in the top 3, but just be aware, have education partners create connections between programs, pathways, and projects such as OC Vibe, which is a 100-acre site project that'll feature a concert, 30 restaurants, hotels, housing units, office, and parks. Going to the economic shocks, more communication and collaboration between government agencies and nonprofits so that government agencies know what agencies to include when they need to deploy emergency operations, and funding to support the infrastructure of those agencies so that there's a reliable safety net. Provide resources and opportunities for individuals to be trained to meet the needs of the economic shock and convert that training and experience as the foundation for their own business to emerge stronger out of the economic shock. We want to be inclusive of removing language, cultural, and other barriers to access, and create a fund and a plan to deploy economic aid to disinvested businesses and individuals for lease rent payments, medical bills, and other basic needs and expenses. There's also a tie for 3rd here, technical assistance for small business and financial management to ensure they have their financial records in order to qualify for support and government assistance. That adds in language, focused outreach, and other guidelines to ensure resources benefit small business owners or small business owned by historically disinvested community members, namely BIPOC owned small businesses. Moving to the next category. Engage local employers in creating and expanding work-based learning opportunities, such as apprenticeships that lead into these career pathways, improving community engagement, participation of low-income residents of color and historically disinvested communities in the creation of community development strategies and projects to ensure direct participation in decisions, and for those decisions to have the highest benefit for those residents. Education for high school students on employment opportunities, including non-college tracks, endeavoring to ensure that all high school students receive the same information on the opportunities. And as you can see, there's a tie here as well, to support pre-existing nonprofits and initiatives aimed at reskilling and upskilling workers, especially in disinvested communities. Sorry, I need it.
Lo que está haciendo Jesse ahorita es una revisión, un repaso de las estrategias que recibieron la mayoría de votos, y en unas de estas categorías hay empates al momento, pero se están repasando las primeras 3 y en unos casos 4 estrategias.
Thanks, Ish. And then, so strategies for increasing health equity, greater access, investment in traditionally marginalized and lower income communities that address community health and social determinant of health in the environment that they live in. These investments can address health, good jobs, open space, affordable housing, and other important community priorities in improving neighborhoods. So that was the included language, but again, the access to basic needs that are not directly healthcare services, but that will impact an individual's health, i.e. high quality food, housing, etc. So I think, just so you know, the parentheses in the middle of that, I think was supposed to better explain kind of this IE section. So I think that was some language already recommended from one of your collaborative members. Advocate for more affordable health insurance, more outreach and awareness, and investment on private health activities, and access to culturally accepted health services. And then ensure that all of the county's communities have access to mental health care. Sorry, I need to get more here.
And Jesse, a good question in the chat. The color-coded document will be available in Spanish as well.
Yeah, we can do that. Yes. I mean, we've been working with yes, in short, yes. We have, the surveys are in Spanish, and we have a spreadsheet, and I will color code it, right? And we can work on that.
Sounds good. Thank
Um,
you.
Right. So then we have strategies for increasing environmental equity, establish green innovation zones where small businesses are supported in the transitioning to cleaner and more sustainable power sources and methods of operation, production, distribution, form strong partnerships with community-based organizations to identify and develop new green spaces, and utilize data points and mapping from research, i.e. Cal Environmental Screen, to focus on heat islands and negative environmental impacts in disadvantaged communities. And the last category, for aligning with state strategies, support the California K through 16 Education Collaborative, which we heard a little bit about when we had our in-person meeting, to build strong partnerships between school districts, community colleges, and local employers to create seamless pathways for students. A collaborative approach where the private and public sectors align on goals and programs to support more jobs that are paid a living wage, and incorporate the need for more affordable housing, workforce housing, and/or housing stipends, and connects to accelerating investments in infrastructure. And then I'll just do this last one just because it is so close. It's one vote off. Deploy and build infrastructure for clean energy uses, which will require training for those who want to be electricians and skilled construction workers. And with this, do people prefer I go to the kind of the strategy mapping where they're now out of the category but are close, or do people want to just kind of bounce between categories based on what they're reviewing and their initial thoughts?
Maybe we open it up for
Yeah, of course.
thought or two before we move on. Let's go to Luis, and then others are welcome. Go ahead, Luis.
And then Luis and others, just direct me on which tab, you know, if it helps you make your case.
Just in general, for the process, or I guess understanding the one you have where the colors are all lined up, the strategy mapping tab. So this is to help us realize that some of the strategies in different categories are, you know, aligned and could, you know, possibly, but does that mean that we would like, what's the intention of pointing that out? Is that we can combine the ones that are in the same category. That makes sense to me. But are we talking about maybe combining ones that are in different categories, or
probably within in the same? So as you can imagine, like, you know, if we talk about like job quality and access, as the state has their categories, some people thought that it better addressed the growth of targeted industries, or it addressed economic equity, but it's still about, you know, job training. And so what you saw in this, what you see here is, if we took away the state's categories, here are the topics that are very similar. And again, we can ultimately decide where it would fit within those categories, but I didn't want people to think, well, there's like a mention of training in 4 different categories, so you weren't able to make that comparison as easy. But just to show you, of all the recommendations that are being considered, here are the ones that are along the same theme. And so I think but to your point, you would most likely be consolidating within the columns you see here, right? So you wouldn't take a housing thing and then add it to talk about local workforce. But if you wanted to say, you could do education for high school students, also goes along with that local educational institutions building talent pipelines. That sounds very similar. We could find a way to make that one, and therefore it could open up another strategy to then elevate to the top 3. You know, you guys are well within your right to do that. So I would think, as you look at this, it's more about looking at now these columns and thinking about, these sound a lot alike, and that way you're not completely eliminating one of the options, right, that didn't make the cut, because it already sounded similar to one, or it could be included in one that is kind of in the top 21.
Can I add one more
Sure.
thing? If you can go to the increasing economic diversification tab. I guess one possible way that I think that we can think about it is, for example, you know, row number 5, the childcare and transportation, which is tied for 3rd, but is very different than the other ones. So maybe in this case, it would make sense to, if we're already going to have a bunch of green ones, which could potentially be grouped together, then maybe we can go ahead and include row number 5, because that would allow us to, cover a little bit more ground.
Exactly. That's the opportunity this provides, of course, if the collaborative wants to move in that direction. But I think that is kind of the idea. And I think that's what people were hinting at in some of the previous conversations around the strategies they saw.
Yeah, I would support that.
That would open up space.
Great. Thank you both for with that commentary. Let's turn to Tony and then Nireh. Tony.
Yeah, I really see this as kind of the initial mind mapping, and I'm not to be disruptive, but I don't get too caught up into what's here and then trying to like edit one sentence. And that's why I really appreciate Jesse's kind of extra strategy category. So this is kind of revealing to us what we're thinking. And it may mean that as you look at it, you may identify that there is a gap, or there is 15 ones. You could say workforce housing should be under workforce, or it should be under housing. And so this is really kind of freeing in the sense of trying to put some data out there, some things to organize our thoughts around. And you might have a piece that maybe only scored 3. I'm looking at healthcare, something that was important for us, or got 2 points, but it is an illustration of a particular type of project that would fall under actually the greatest voting getting. So I just want to encourage all of us to be as thoughtful and not be so caught up on the exact words. There's a little bit of time for us to kind of relax and go, but kind of let it reveal itself in what we see.
Great. Thank you, Tony. And let's go. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Nireh? Nireh. My apologies.
That's okay. So two things. So I think it's not wrong to say that this is reflecting our thinking. But is our thinking supported by research? So I personally think it would have made a little more sense if, instead of just suggesting strategies and voting on it, if instead we had workforce groups assigned for each category, and each workforce group looked up strategies that have been successful in addressing whatever issue we're thinking about in the category, and then came up with strategies. So I kind of think we're doing it backwards by talking about the strategies and then thinking about how can we support this in our application to the state, rather than what does the research say and what kind of strategies should we propose based on that. I'm saying that because as an economist, I know that a lot of government policies have what are called unintended consequences. So we come up with these strategies with a good intention. We want to improve equity. We want to have economic diversification. We want to be able to withstand economic shocks. But often the direct intention is not what is seen because of unintended consequences. So I'm just afraid of, like, some of these strategies I'm reading. When I was voting on it, I was like, oh, there's no way these are going to come on top. And I'm a little afraid of some things I'm seeing. So I'm just a little worried about that. I think we need to have a little more research backing up why we've chosen these strategies. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, I'm not clear on what we're trying to do next. Are we trying to consolidate and make them more actionable? Or, like, I guess I'm just not clear on that, but
yeah, thank you. So Nireh, I think, unfortunately, I don't think we can implement your recommendation. I think, you got, you transition into this halfway because someone at Chapman had to step off. So, we did discuss how we want to proceed with this. And so it would be, we essentially, I mean, it'd be difficult. We cannot just go back and redo it all, because essentially the collaborative already agreed to proceed with the process that we came up with. So on that point, I would say that's the answer. But to the second point, at the end of the day, we have to get to a set of strategies to deliver to the state based on the categories you see kind of in these tabs ultimately. And so we will, these I think will just be, high level. I will bring up, and, I will welcome Dr. Wawa to step off as well. But, there's a document called the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, where strategies are developed. I would say, like, it's not just a bullet point statement, but there is, again, content behind those. And that's something that we'll also have to develop as well. But we can't develop that without getting kind of the high level framework that is going to be decided by, you as a collaborative member. So that's ultimately what we're getting towards. Again, people can try to modify and refine language because this was very much decentralized. I think you have some very clear strategies versus some it was, more ideation, but very much we had to allow it to be a very open and public process, and no one way was going to overrule the other. And so that's why, again, because there's such variety and even the length of these, we will have to give the collaborative the opportunity to see what is the right, not even the right middle ground, but essentially what is the right direction to take as we think about finalizing these strategies.
Yeah. So in writing the content, if we were to find out that, for example, one of, like the proposal we have in one of the strategies is not going to get us the result we want, would we be able to modify the language of the strategy? Like, not just trivial changes, but an actual modification of the strategy. Like, is that possible, or are we stuck to these strategies?
Well, I don't think that we could just create a whole new strategy, because it would, again, undermine the previous process. But this doesn't have to, all of it doesn't have to be delivered until, again, the end of August. So we, again, do have time to see what some analysis around these strategies would look like, and whether people still feel like it's worth acting upon and delivering to the state. We'll definitely have that opportunity, but I wouldn't say that we can just completely disregard what's on this list and rewrite them.
Now, Jesse, this is Linda.
Go ahead, Linda.
If you don't, thank you. Nairi, with all due respect, economic development too, here. I'm thinking, what you're hearing from Tony and what you're hearing from those of us that have been engaged from the beginning, this was not born in a vacuum. There's enormous research that was undertaken, community outreach that was undertaken. What you're seeing here are strategies that have evolved and emerged from considerable research and thoughtfulness. That's one point I wanted to make. The second point is to your point about, can we, if we're stuck with these strategies. See, I agree with Tony. These are not, these are going to be interpreted in ways that are going to give us the most effective pathways to achieve the outcomes that we intend. So this was just a narrative that was assembled by everyone to give people an opportunity to express their support of how best to go about this to the next step and the next development perspective. So I think this is the framework. And no, we would not want to take this first one, which says support efforts by local educational institutions, RACA and all that, and completely offload it. What we'll do is interpret that to achieve the most effective outcomes. And I think that's probably the fair and most forward way to look at this assembly of data points.
All right, thank you, Linda, Nairi, and Jesse. I mean, this is exactly the sort of forum, sort of conversation and discussions that this forum invites every time, and to be constructive collectively. And I do see a couple of additional comments in the chat. Tony, Josefa, Luis, if you want to share your vantage points as well on this particular topic.
I already did, so I'll pass.
Great. Josefa or Luis?
I would just say that Nairi is not wrong, but Linda is not wrong either. I think that I think there's a path where both could be true. where these are strategies that have come from exhaustive research and engagement and are really come from the wisdom of our community. So I think there's value there. I think to Nairi's point, perhaps we could see these as not strategies, but strategic directions, right? Like, so they are directional. And I think we can refine and define and sharpen them with some evidence-based, being informed by evidence-based research. So I do think that we are on the right track, and this process and framework has, relative to looking at all these other regions that are stuck in, 2 steps behind us. I think we are progressing well, and that we still have space to continue to be more informed by evidence and research as we sharpen from being directional to, final strategies as we collectively are defining it.
Thank you, Joseph.
And real quick, I mean, if Luis wants to, I would say, like, I think what we can do, especially now that some have been elevated more than others, is that we can definitely look to the report, and I'm happy to pull the sections that address this to see if there's alignment. And then if not, again, we can kind of see again where these all came from. Because I can review the outreach and engagement documents that we did to the community through those surveys and show where there is compatibility, and with that research document and where there is compatibility or not. So kind of to Luis's point a little bit, again, I hope that when all of you voted, you look to some of those documents to guide you in some of your decisions, as well as your own personal experience. But I can do that in probably the next meeting, if not the one after, where I can try to do some compatibility analysis, you might say, between some of the top ones here and between our research document and our outreach and engagement analysis.
All right, thank you, Joseph and Jesse. See, Linda, you have your hand up, and then Luis, if you wanted to add anything in addition to your comments in the chat, welcome you to do that after Linda.
Okay.
Go ahead, Linda.
I just left it up there. Forgive me.
Gotcha.
down
Go ahead.
now.
No worries. Luis?
Yeah, I guess I also agree. I think Josefa put it well, that that both things can be true. Earlier on, I know that one of the emphasis is that we were making when we were asking for more participative action research approach or approaches. We talked about the importance of seeing this as an iterative process that continually needs to go back and and be vetted by community, and particularly by disinvested community. So just that I still hope that we will continue to do that. I mentioned earlier that a few of our organizations that work in disinvested communities, with disinvested communities, would like to host another forum to vet these ideas. And Nairi, I'm not sure what if you're with a particular organization or institution, but if you would like to join those efforts, you can let us know also.
I'm with Chapman University.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Luis and Nairi. And yeah, just to add my 2 cents, I think, to Josefa's comment, because you all have been so diligent in your process, unlike perhaps other regions, you have some wiggle room to iterate on the results of this exercise which is we presented results on. So I think comments that everyone has shared certainly have the potential to coexist and move us into a more narrowed, specific part of the evolution of this initiative. So with that, I welcome any final thoughts or comments from anyone else on this overview of the results before we move into our closing. Anyone else would like to offer a comment or question? ¿Gustan hacer un comentario sobre los resultados de las encuestas o ofrecer una sugerencia, recomendación en cómo proceder? Señor, vamos a movernos a la última etapa de la agenda de hoy. So, Jesse, I'll turn to you for some closing thoughts on, I think, an exercise that we also
Yes.
experienced.
No, so Ishta, I think you're aware of it. You were present. I think if you could lead that. Let me actually
Sure.
stop share so you're not just looking at a screen.
That sounds good. So there was a fascinating exercise that was done to kind of activate the complementary hemisphere of the brain. For those of us that were in Sacramento, it's not a new or novel exercise. It's one that many of you have probably seen somewhere in your professional or personal careers. But the question was asked of everybody in the room: if there was a front page story on your local newspaper describing the success of this initiative, 10, 20 years from now, what would that headline be? And some folks took it to also read as headline and subheadline, but what would that newspaper say in terms of like the success and what was achieved, the outcomes that were accomplished with this initiative that, we're almost on a year's journey on. And that's something that folks in the room had, varying answers to, very creative answers. And it was a great way to really stimulate the creative side of our minds to complement all the numbers and policy language that gets offered. But we wanted to give a quick second to invite some of you just to imagine, see the future a bit, and share what your headline would be in either the chat or come off mute and just recite it with your colleagues here. Some of them are starting to come in the chat, so thank you for indulging us. But we find importance in getting creative and taking a step back and giving space for this sort of exercise too. So, who'd like to come off mute and share their headline? One in the chat says home ownership levels in Santa Ana near 100%. Community members finally won. What are others?
And this is I know a massive and complicated thing. So I think the way we thought, like the headline kind of can help us like with some sort of direction, right? Your personal direction, your personal North Star.
Right.
At the end of this, all the effort and work you've put in, what can be an outcome that you're proud of here in Orange County from this work?
And that's kind of a lot to ask in a matter of seconds, but give it your best shot in your initial strike at that. Orange County economic diversity sets the standard for the state. They can be as aspirational as you want, as creative as you want as well. So what are others? Feel free to come off mute as well. You don't feel like typing. Jesse, I wonder if you've given some thought to yours while others are typing theirs. I know we've had a couple days, but what are your thoughts on a potential headline, sort of North Star for you?
I would say the North Star, it's harder because I didn't really kind of do the activity thinking of the headline, but probably be more direct, again, Orange County creates, 5,000 jobs in the green economy and 250 businesses from underserved communities now have economic independence. That's a long headline, but I'm more towards if we can do something like that. That's kind of what we're going towards. So I'd have to think more, make a pithy headline, but something more to that direction.
Jesse has been removed from head of the editorial
Yes,
board.
I'm not a headline writer.
How about others? Anybody want to come off mute and share theirs? Economic equity, business, and communities thrive in Orange County. Orange County breaking down silos and succeeds with cross-sector collaboration. ¿Gustan compartir lo que sería, qué diría el diario, el periódico de Orange County con el éxito 10, 20 años de hoy con esta iniciativa? ¿Qué gustarían que hiciera esa primera página del periódico? Es un ejercicio para activar el lado creativo del cerebro. All right, well, give that some thought. We certainly will, and maybe add space for others to bring their headlines in future meetings as we close. I'll offer two last ones here. Orange County creates inclusive talent pipelines in middle and higher paying jobs. And then the final one that I'll recite here is Orange County employers embrace and empower youth through collaborative effort in providing internships, externships, and apprenticeships on an expanded level. So continue thinking about what that North Star is for you personally, for your sector, your stakeholder groups, and how that is reflected in the work that we're doing here to iterate on the, not just the result of the survey findings, but the upcoming months of work in refining those results to really hone in on specificity around projects that will be surfaced as part of your plan at the end of the summer, start of the fall. Oh, well, I guess we'll give a last bonus and then we'll say thank you and see you next time. OC's economy is surging as they adapt to clean energy throughout all sectors. So thank you, Melissa, for that one. Okay, well, thank you all for indulging us this morning. Have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. And follow up to come via email from Jesse. As usual, very thorough and very insightful. So keep an eye out for that. And we'll see you on a Zoom in the next coming weeks. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there.